They took the good years. They took the graduation money. They took the wedding money. They took the down payment money. She never once said thank you. On Mother's Day, my only daughter mailed me an eviction notice, not handed, mailed, first class, a stamp with a flag on it, delivered to my own front door. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," she said, smiling, and slid it across the table. 30 days. The house is ours now. There was a store cake on the counter nobody had baked. There was a lawyer 40 miles south already drawing papers. And there was a lockbox in my garage, untouched for 4 years, that nobody in my family remembered existed. And then I started selling. Let me take you back 6 weeks. I was 61 years old. My name is Loretta Hollis. I reconciled things for a living. Numbers mostly, sometimes people, if they let me. I sat that Sunday morning at my dining room table in Marbury, Ohio, glasses on a beaded chain, a shoebox of receipts open in front of me, belonging to a man named Curtis who ran the tire shop off Route 9. Curtis wrote everything down on the backs of gas receipts, in pencil. He called it bookkeeping. I found a $4 error in about 90 seconds. I fixed it in the margin, small and neat, the way I fixed everything. I did not sigh. I did not complain. I had been doing this since before Curtis was born. My daughter Courtney walked in without knocking. It was still technically Courtney's childhood home. Old habits kept their key. Courtney was 33, blonde highlights growing out dark at the roots, a Coach bag she'd financed. She set a grocery store cake box on the counter, yellow cake, the kind with the plastic dome lid. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," Courtney said. She smiled the way people smile when they've rehearsed it in the car. "You've got 30 days. The house is ours now." She slid an envelope across the table, right next to the cake. I looked at it. I did not pick it up right away. I finished the line I was writing in Curtis's ledger. I capped my pen. Only then did I reach for the envelope. Inside was a formal eviction notice, typed county letterhead. 30-day window, the kind of document a lawyer drafts to look like law even when it isn't quite. "Courtney," I said. My voice did not rise. It never did. "This is my house." "Not anymore," Courtney said. "Brandon's parents are moving in. Dale's retiring. They need the space. This is the space that makes sense. I've lived here 31 years, and you've had it long enough," Courtney said. There it was, the sentence under the sentence, out in the open, on a Sunday, with cake on the counter. "Dad's gone, Mom. You don't need 4 bedrooms." I did not answer that. I looked at my daughter a long moment, the way you look at a stranger wearing a familiar coat. Then I looked back down at Curtis's shoebox and found the next receipt. Nobody in that kitchen spoke for almost a minute. Courtney had expected tears, maybe, or a fight she could win by being louder. She had not expected her mother to keep working. She stood there a second too long. Then she set a business card on the table. Maddox and Dale Construction, Brandon's family firm. She let herself out the way she'd let herself in. I sat alone with the cake nobody had made and the notice nobody had asked my opinion on. I looked toward the garage door, off the kitchen, closed since the funeral. Behind it, on a shelf above the workbench, sat a steel lockbox my husband Earl had kept for 22 years. I had never opened it. I had never needed to. Not yet. I was born and raised in Marbury, a town of 11,000 people an hour northeast of Columbus. The kind of place where everybody's grandmother went to the same 3 churches, where the diner on 5th Street still took checks. My own mother had cleaned houses on the nice side of town for 30 years. She came home every night smelling like other people's lemon polish, hands cracked from other people's dish soap. I grew up watching my mother be careful in rooms that weren't hers. I promised myself, quietly, the way I promised myself most things, that I would own a room outright before I died. I married Earl Hollis when I was 23. He was a lineman, then a union electrician, broad-shouldered, slow to anger, the kind of man who fixed things without being asked and never mentioned it after. We bought the brick two-story on Bedford Street the year Reagan was president, on an installment contract because the bank downtown had turned us down twice, for reasons nobody wrote on paper but everybody understood. Earl paid it off, $412 a month, for 31 years, working overtime through 2 recessions and one heart scare he never mentioned until after. I kept the books the whole time. I reconciled every dollar that ever passed through that house. We raised one daughter in it, Courtney, an only child, doted on, maybe too much. The kind of doting that happens after 2 losses nobody talked about at church. I gave Courtney piano lessons I couldn't quite afford. A used Honda for her 16th birthday. $11,000 toward a wedding, to a man named Brandon Maddox. His family ran a home building company 40 miles south in Columbus. His father, Dale, had a way of looking at me that made me feel, every time, like the help. I never said that out loud. Not to Earl, not to Courtney, not even fully to myself. Not for years. But I remembered the first Thanksgiving at the Maddox's house. Dale handed me his coat at the door before I'd said a word, assuming, the way some men assume, that a black woman standing in his foyer must be there to take it. I remembered correcting him gently. I remembered him laughing it off, too loud, the kind of laugh that covers for itself. I remembered it every year since, filed the way I filed everything, precisely, without drama, for later. Earl had noticed things too, quietly, the way he noticed a short in a wall before it started a fire. 2 years before he died, he sat me down at this same table and told me he wanted to change the deed. Put it just in your name, he said. Not because I don't trust you, because I don't trust them. He didn't need to say who them was. That family's got its hooks in Courtney, and Courtney doesn't see it yet. If something happens to me, I want this house to be a wall nobody can knock down but you. I had thought, at the time, that he meant Dale's temper, or Brandon's spending. I had not imagined my own daughter would be the one holding the sledgehammer. Earl died 4 years ago. A heart, finally, the same one he'd hidden a scare from years before. I sat in the front pew at Mount Zion Baptist in a black dress I still owned. I sang when the choir stood, because Earl would have wanted my voice in the room even then. I grieved the way I did everything, quietly, completely, on my own schedule, telling no one exactly how deep it went. I kept the house exactly as it was. I kept doing books for 6 small businesses around Marbury out of the dining room. Curtis's tire shop, the hair salon on 3rd, a landscaping outfit, a used bookstore, a diner, a small church daycare. I sang alto at Mount Zion every Sunday I could. I never remarried, never really looked. I had loved one man for 38 years, and I wasn't interested in loving anyone else for practice. And I had never opened Earl's lockbox. It sat on the garage shelf, dust gathering. A small steel thing, with a combination he'd given me once, written on an index card tucked into my Bible. I hadn't needed it. Until a Sunday morning, 6 weeks before my daughter mailed me an eviction notice, when I actually thought about opening it. I hadn't. Not that day. Something in me wasn't ready. The eviction notice changed the timeline of that readiness considerably. The first thing I did, the morning after Mother's Day, was call Vernon Tate. Vernon had been our attorney for 22 years, a black man about my age. He'd built his practice one careful case at a time, out of a storefront office on 5th Street, 2 doors down from the diner. He'd drafted the paperwork the year Earl changed the deed. He remembered it exactly because Earl had asked him that day to keep a copy in the firm's fireproof file, separate from everything else. He said, and I'm quoting him, Loretta, "In case anybody ever tries something cute," Vernon told me over the phone. I could hear him smiling, gently, the way you smile at a memory of someone gone. Your husband was a careful man. Careful enough to see this coming, I said. I wasn't. Nobody sees their own child coming, Vernon said. That's not a flaw in you. That's just what a daughter is supposed to be. Somebody you don't have to defend against. He pulled the file. The deed was recorded in my name alone, Loretta Ann Hollis. Sole owner. No survivorship clause naming anyone else. Filed and stamped by the Willow County Recorder's Office, 2 years before Earl passed. Courtney's name appeared nowhere on it. Neither did Brandon's. Neither did Dale's. So the notice they sent you, Vernon said, isn't worth the postage stamp on it. Then why send it? I said. It wasn't really a question. Because they think you don't know what you own, Vernon said. People do that a lot, Loretta. To women like you especially. They assume you're standing in a house you're only borrowing. I thought of Dale at the door that first Thanksgiving, holding out his coat to me. I've been assumed about my whole life, I said. I know how to correct it. Then let's correct it properly, Vernon said. Quietly. On paper, where it counts. Come by Tuesday. Bring the deed. I want to look you in the eye when I tell you what you can actually do here. I went in Tuesday morning, in my good church coat. I sat across from Vernon's scarred oak desk. He laid the recorded deed flat between us, like a hand of cards nobody else at that table knew I was holding. You could fight the notice, he said. Send them a cease and desist. Watch them fold when their own lawyer tells them the deed's not in their name. That would feel good for about a day. What's the other option? I said. The other option, Vernon said, is you stop playing defense entirely. It's your house, free and clear, no mortgage left on it. Appraised, I'd guess, somewhere north of $600,000, with what's happened to Bedford Street the last 5 years. You could sell it, quietly, before they ever move a box through that door. Let them show up to a house that isn't theirs to lose, because it already belongs to somebody else. I sat with that a moment. I thought about 31 years of $412 payments. I thought about Earl's hands on the porch railing he'd rebuilt twice. I thought about the choir robe on the hook in the hall closet, and the quilt my mother made, still folded at the foot of my bed. It's not really about the house, I said finally. It's about what she said, that I don't need it, that I've had it long enough. I know, Vernon said gently, but sometimes the cleanest answer to somebody trying to take something from you isn't a fight. It's simply not being there to be taken from. Let them arrive at an empty stage, Loretta. Let the paperwork do what you don't have to raise your voice to do. I looked at the deed again. My name, typed, notarized, recorded, real. List it, I said. I said it quietly, the way I corrected a $4 error in a shoebox. No drama, just accuracy. That was the moment the ledger started, though I wouldn't have called it that. I simply began keeping track, the way I kept track of everything. In a small spiral notebook I bought at the drugstore for $1.49. 30 years of bookkeeping had taught me one thing. The truth survives best in writing. $412 a month, 31 years. That was the mortgage Earl paid off in full. 9 years before he died. $640,000. The number the appraiser would eventually put on the house. Though not before something happened that made me write a second number in the margin. $11,000. What Earl and I had given Courtney and Brandon toward their wedding, pulled from my own retirement account, never once mentioned again. That was not the kind of gift you kept a bill for. Until now. when the bill seemed to matter again. If only to myself, if only on paper, if only so I'd remember exactly what generosity had bought me. I didn't tell Courtney any of it. I didn't call to argue. I simply began the process the way I began every process, methodically, on schedule, without theater. I called a realtor 2 towns over, a woman named Patrice Odom who didn't know the Maddoxes and had no reason to talk. I listed the house quietly, off the main sites at first, word of mouth in the kind of circles where word of mouth still moves fast. Church people, retired teachers, a young black couple relocating from Cleveland who wanted exactly this street, this school district, this kind of solid old brick house with good bones. I started boxing things up in the evenings after my clients' books were done. 31 years takes longer to box than you think. I found Earl's reading glasses in a kitchen drawer, still in their case. I found the church program from our wedding, brittle at the folds. I found a photograph of Courtney at 6 on the porch steps, gap-toothed, holding a popsicle. A summer so ordinary neither of us had known to treasure it. I did not cry over any of it. I set each thing carefully into its box, the way I set each number carefully into its column, and kept moving. 3 weeks into that process, a letter arrived that wasn't addressed to me. It came to the house, addressed to Courtney Maddox, from a bank I didn't recognize. It happened twice more over the following 10 days. 3 letters total, all for Courtney, all from the same bank. The kind of correspondence that arrives in a slightly too thick envelope when something has gone quietly wrong somewhere. I almost didn't open them. Almost. I had never once opened my daughter's mail in 33 years. Not a report card, not a private note, but something about the return address and the timing made me set the third one aside instead of forwarding it. I held it up to the light first. I told myself that was as far as I'd go. Then I opened it. It was a loan servicing statement. Courtney Maddox, borrower. The collateral listed was a property on Bedford Street, Marbury, Ohio. My address, my house, a loan of $88,000, drawn 4 months earlier, co-signed by Dale Maddox, secured, according to the paperwork, by a property Courtney did not legally own. I sat very still at my dining room table a long time. I was not shaking. I wanted to note that about myself later. I was not shaking. I was doing what I always did with a discrepancy, tracing it back to its source. I called Vernon that same afternoon. She pledged my house, I said. My voice, even now, did not rise. As collateral. For $88,000. To a bank, co-signed by Dale. There was a pause on Vernon's end. It told me he understood before I finished explaining. That's not just presumptuous, Loretta, he said. That's fraud. You can't pledge collateral you don't own. Somebody signed an affidavit of ownership to get that loan through underwriting. Either Courtney lied on a federal document or somebody helped her lie. Why would she need $88,000? I said, though I thought I already knew. Vernon made a few calls. He had a friend at the county clerk's office, a woman named Patricia Boone, who owed him a favor from years back. Patricia pulled the public filings on Maddox and Dale construction. 2 liens. 1 subdivision stalled for 8 months. Contractors unpaid. A stop work notice from the county. Brandon's business, the one that was supposed to be thriving enough to need a bigger house, was collapsing in slow motion. Nobody outside the family had known. They're broke, Vernon said when he called me back. Not struggling. Broke. Dale's been propping up Brandon's company for over a year, and even Dale's running dry. That $88,000 was supposed to buy them 6 months. Courtney told the bank the house was already in her name, that her mother had, quote, agreed to transfer it, pending a family arrangement. There was no arrangement, I said. I know, Vernon said. which means either your daughter lied to a federal lender or she genuinely believed the eviction notice would make it true before anyone checked. Either way, Loretta, that notice wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was a woman trying to turn a lie into a fact. I closed my eyes a moment. I thought of Courtney sliding the envelope across the table, next to a cake nobody had baked. You've had it long enough. I understood now. The sentence had never really been about my age, or 4 bedrooms. It had been about a debt someone needed my house to pay. I wrote it in my notebook, in the small, neat hand I used for every column I'd ever kept honest. $88,000. Not a fight over inheritance. A hole they needed me to fall into. I did not confront Courtney. Not yet. I kept listing the house. I kept boxing the 31 years. I kept reconciling Curtis's shoebox, and the salon's receipts, and the daycare's grant paperwork. The world didn't stop needing its numbers straightened just because my own family had come apart at a kitchen table on Mother's Day. But I did, one evening in early June, walk out to the garage. I stood in front of the shelf above Earl's workbench. I finally took down the steel lockbox that had sat there, untouched, for 4 years. The combination was still on the index card in my Bible. My hands did not shake when I turned the dial. 8, then 14, then 22. The day and the month and the year we'd married. The lid gave with a small, tired click. The sound of a thing that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Inside sat 2 things. A folded copy of the deed, the same one Vernon had, notarized, dated, my name typed clean across the top. And a letter, in Earl's handwriting, the same square, careful print he used to label every breaker in every panel he ever wired. I read it standing there in the garage, under the bare bulb. The smell of old sawdust and motor oil around me, the way it always was. Baby, if you're reading this, something's happened to me, or something's happened with the house. Either way, I want you to know I saw it coming before you did. I love our girl. I'll always love her. But I've watched Dale Maddox look at you for 11 years like you're a woman he's tolerating instead of a woman his son married into. I don't trust what that kind of looking does to a family over time. I put this house in your name alone. A man who builds houses for a living, like Dale does, ought to understand better than anybody. A deed is the only thing that's really true when everything else gets complicated. If somebody's trying to take it from you, baby, remember it was always yours. Every board of it. Nobody can mail you out of something you already own. I love you. I always will. Sing loud on Sundays for me. I sat down right there on the garage floor, on an overturned bucket. I let myself cry, for the first time in longer than I could remember. Not for the house, for him. For 38 years of a man who saw around corners I hadn't known needed watching. Then I wiped my face, the way I always did, quickly, without apology. I carried the letter and the deed back inside. I set them on the dining room table next to Curtis's shoebox. I called Vernon one more time. I'm ready, I said. Close it. Sell the house. Whatever's next, I'm ready for it. There's one more thing you should know first, Vernon said. I dug into that appraisal Courtney's bank used to justify the loan. Loretta, they had your house appraised low. 40,000 under 3 comparable houses on your own street, sold in the last year. Houses owned by white families. I pulled the comps myself. Same square footage, same lot size, same year built. $40,000 isn't a rounding error. That's a pattern. One I've seen before in this county. I was quiet a moment. They low-balled it to make the loan look smaller than the risk, I said slowly, working the numbers the way I worked everything. That's part of it, Vernon said. It's also just what happens to women like you in transactions like this over and over in towns like ours. Most people never get the paperwork in front of them to prove it. You're going to. When we close, I want the real appraisal on the record. Full value. Your name. No discount for who's selling it. Do it, I said. All the way up. Every dollar it's worth. I thought of my mother, cleaning other people's houses for 30 years, careful in rooms that weren't hers. I thought of Dale Maddox holding out his coat to me in a doorway, assuming. I had spent 61 years being careful in rooms I was told, in 100 small unspoken ways, weren't fully mine. This time, the room was going to be exactly as much mine as the deed said it was. No more, no less. Precisely. The closing happened on a Tuesday morning, the last week of June, 11 days before the 30-day window would have expired. I signed the papers in Vernon's office, transferring the Bedford Street house to a young couple from Cleveland, Marcus and Renee Delaney, for $640,000, full appraised value, no discount, on the record, in my name and no one else's. Marcus shook my hand afterward with both of his. We saw 30 other houses, he said. None of them felt like this one, like somebody had loved it right for a long time. Somebody did, I said. Take good care of it. I did not tell Courtney the house had sold. I did not tell Dale. I let the 30 days keep running on the calendar Courtney had chosen. The way you let a debt come due on its own schedule, instead of chasing the debtor down early to collect it. I rented a small apartment on the far side of town for the transition, month to month, close enough to Mount Zion that I could still walk to choir practice. I began, in the quiet weeks that followed, to look at listings of my own. Smaller houses, a little bungalow with good light and a garden bed already turned. I was in no hurry. For the first time in 31 years, I owned exactly what I needed, and not 1 square foot more. There was something in that arithmetic that felt, to me, like relief. I kept doing Curtis's books. I kept singing alto. I kept my notebook updated, the ledger growing longer in my small, neat hand. $640,000 the sale. $88,000 Courtney's hidden loan. $40,000 the lowball nobody would ever get to keep. $11,000 a wedding gift given freely, never once regretted, only remembered now with a clearer eye. $412 a month for 372 months. The number that built the whole house in the first place, brick by patient brick. Long before any of this began. I did not call it revenge. I would not have used that word if you'd asked me. I called it, when Vernon asked one afternoon how I was holding up, exactly what it was. I'm not fighting anybody, I said. I'm just not standing where they left me to be found. I thought, more than once in those weeks, about the moment still coming. The one I hadn't scheduled but somehow already knew the shape of. The day Courtney and Dale would arrive at a house that no longer belonged to any of them, in front of the neighbors, in front of whatever they'd brought with them, and would have to learn, out loud, in public, exactly what they'd already spent. I did not dread it. I waited for it the way I waited for tax season, calmly, on schedule, ready with the numbers. The bank teller incident happened on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the closing. I went in to deposit the cashier's check into a new account. At a different branch, one I'd chosen specifically because it wasn't the branch the Maddoxes used. The teller was young, maybe 25, name tag reading Ashley. She took one look at the check, $640,000, one look at me. Then she asked for 2 forms of government identification before processing anything. I had my driver's license out already. I set it on the counter. That's one, I said, evenly. I need a second form, Ashley said. Company policy on large deposits. I looked past the teller's shoulder. A man 3 windows down, white, maybe 70, was depositing what looked like a Social Security check. waved through with a license and a smile and a comment about the weather. I did not point this out. I had learned decades ago that pointing it out in the moment rarely changed the moment. It only changed how tired I felt afterward. I simply reached into my purse, produced my passport, and set it beside the license without comment. Ashley processed the deposit. She never once looked up to see whether I was upset. I had made sure, the way I always made sure. There was nothing on my face to see. That evening, at my kitchen table, I wrote it down anyway. The date, the branch, the teller's name tag, the exact wording of the request. Not because I planned to do anything with it that week, because 30 years of bookkeeping had taught me a simple truth. A pattern only becomes visible once somebody writes down enough of the instances. Alone, each one looks like an accident. Together, they look like exactly what they are. I mentioned it to Vernon the next time I saw him, almost as an aside. The way you mention weather, that's the fourth account of that kind I've heard this year, Vernon said, not looking up from his notes. Different banks, same branch policies somehow. I'd like your notes if you're willing. I'm building something. Building what? I asked. A pattern, Vernon said. The same one Patricia's intake log was already showing me. I'm not interested in punishing one teller for bad training, Loretta. I'm interested in whether 15 complaints, filed properly, with dates and names, finally get somebody's attention. Somebody at the state level who'll actually look at how these branches operate. That takes time. It takes people willing to write it down instead of carrying it home and letting it go. I've been carrying it home and letting it go my whole life, I said quietly. Maybe it's time some of it went somewhere else instead. I gave him my notes. A small thing, on its own. A single page in a growing file. But handing it over felt different than I expected. Not like a complaint. Like an entry finally being posted to the right column after decades of sitting, unposted, in the part of the ledger nobody else ever saw. In the weeks after the closing, before any of the Maddoxes knew the house was gone, I kept living the ordinary parts of my life. It was in those ordinary parts the story picked up an ally nobody in the Maddox family would have expected. Her name was Wanda Pruitt, 64 years old, choir director at Mount Zion for 19 years. A woman who asked for nothing and noticed everything. Wanda had known me since we were young mothers, dropping children off at the same overcrowded Sunday school room. She'd watched, over 4 decades, the particular quiet way I carried hard things, without asking anyone to carry them with me. Wanda showed up at my rental apartment the Tuesday after the closing, casserole dish in hand, no announcement. The way she always did when she sensed something had shifted underneath a friend's careful composure. "You've been singing flat all month," Wanda said, setting the dish on the counter without being asked where the counter was. "Not your voice. Your everything." What happened? I told her. All of it. The eviction notice, the cake, the lockbox, the letter, the loan, the sale. I told it in order, without embellishment, the way I'd narrate a column that finally balanced. Wanda sat with it a long moment. "Lord," she finally said, "that girl mailed you a deadline on Mother's Day." "She did. And you sold the house out from under all 3 of them before they got a truck in the driveway." "I did." Wanda nodded slowly, the way she nodded when a new alto finally landed a hard interval. "Good," she said simply. "Somebody in this family needed to remember whose name is actually on things. It wasn't going to be Courtney. It was going to have to be you." From that Tuesday on, Wanda called every few days, not to check on the situation exactly, just to talk, to sit, to be present the specific, unglamorous way real friendship is present, folding laundry at my table while I finished a client's books. humming alto lines under her breath. She never once told me what to do. She never needed to. She simply made sure I wasn't doing any of it alone. It was Wanda who first raised the invitation Courtney had mailed for the moving weekend. "You going to that little gathering she's planning?" Wanda asked one evening, turning the card over in her hands. "Come say hello to the new chapter, Mom. We'd love to have you." "I don't know yet," I admitted. "I think you should go," Wanda said. "Not to make a scene. You don't need a scene, baby. You've never needed one in your life. But sometimes the truth needs a room full of witnesses to actually land right. You mail somebody a deadline in private, the shame stays private too. You let it meet its consequence in public, in front of the people it was supposed to impress. Something different happens. Something that sticks. I thought about that for days. There was, too, a dinner in the middle of that stretch. One Courtney herself suggested, 3 weeks before the move, a peace offering of sorts, though neither of us named it that. Courtney invited me to a diner on the edge of Marbury, neutral ground, vinyl booths, and a pie case by the register. I agreed to go, still not having told her the house was sold. It was a dramatic irony dinner, without either of us fully admitting it. The kind where one woman already knows the ending, and the other is still narrating a version of events that no longer exists. "I just want things to feel normal again," Courtney said, stirring sugar into coffee she wasn't drinking. "I know the notice was harsh. Dale said it needed to be formal for legal reasons. But I should have talked to you first, like a daughter, not a landlord." "I appreciate you saying that," I said, "and I meant it, even now." "Have you started looking at places?" Courtney asked. "Smaller places. I could help you look." "I've already found something," I said, which was true, and said nothing else, which was also, in its way, true to the letter, if not the spirit. Courtney brightened, visibly relieved, mistaking my calm for surrender rather than what it actually was. A woman 11 days past a closing Courtney knew nothing about, watching her daughter build a future on a foundation already sold to somebody else. "That's great, Mom," Courtney said. "Really, this is all going to work out so much better than you think." I looked at my daughter across the booth, at the tired, hopeful performance of a woman trying to convince herself as much as anyone. I felt something complicated settle in my chest. Not triumph. Not yet. Something closer to grief, for a version of this conversation that could have happened honestly, months ago, if anyone had asked instead of assumed. "I think it's going to work out exactly the way it's supposed to," I said. The only sentence of the whole evening that was entirely, precisely true. I drove home that night. I sat a long time with my notebook open. I added one more line, not a dollar figure this time. A private note. Told her the truth without lying. Let her keep her hope one more month. That's still love, even now. That same week, Curtis brought his shoebox by early before his shop opened. He noticed the boxes stacked in my front hall. "You moving?" Curtis asked, setting the shoebox on the table the way he always did, a little embarrassed by its condition. "Something like that," I said. "You all right?" "I will be," I said, and I meant it, though I didn't explain further. I'd known Curtis 11 years. I'd caught his math errors, covered his quarterly filings when his wife was sick. Never once charged him for the months he couldn't pay in full. He'd never asked me a personal question before that morning. I appreciated that he'd finally asked, even if I wasn't ready to answer it fully. "You've done right by me a long time," Curtis said. "Whatever's going on, you know half this town would show up for you if you asked." "I know," I said. "I've never been much good at asking." "Maybe that's the thing to practice next," Curtis said. He wasn't wrong, though it would take me longer than a single conversation to learn it. I opened his shoebox and found the usual chaos: gas receipts, a few water-stained invoices, one torn ticket from a tire order months overdue. I sorted it the way I always did, quickly, without complaint, and handed him back a clean summary before he'd finished his coffee. "You ever think about retiring?" Curtis asked, only half joking. "Every single day," I said. Then somebody hands me a shoebox, and I remember I'm good at exactly one thing, and I might as well keep doing it. That Sunday, at Mount Zion, the choir sang a hymn I had sung at Earl's funeral. I got through the first verse fine. I cracked slightly on the second. Wanda, standing beside me in the alto section, reached over without missing a note and squeezed my hand once, briefly, the way she always did. I finished the hymn steady. Afterward, in the fellowship hall, over weak coffee and someone's pound cake, 3 older women from the congregation came and sat with me a while. Women who had known my mother. Women who remembered the lemon polish years. Not prying, just present, the way a church does its best work. Quietly, without announcement. Simply by showing up in a room and staying in it. "Your mother would be proud of you," one of them, Miss Odessa, said, patting my hand. "She always said you had her patience and Earl's spine. That's a rare combination, baby. Don't let anybody talk you out of either one." I thought about that walking home, past the Bedford Street turn I no longer needed to take, toward the rental apartment that was, for now, simply where I slept. Dale Maddox had never liked me, not in the way you dislike a person for something they did. In the older, lazier way some men dislike a fact they've never had to examine. He was 68, thick through the shoulders even now. A man who had built 40 subdivisions across 3 counties. He still introduced himself at every barbecue by naming the ones with his name on the entrance signs. He believed, the unexamined way certain men believe certain things, that the world divided cleanly into people who built and people who were built for. He'd never once questioned which side of that line he'd placed me on. He said it out loud only once. A 4th of July cookout, 4 summers back. Half a beer past careful. I was near the grill, helping Brandon's mother plate corn. "Some of us built this town with our hands, Loretta," Dale said, smiling the way he always smiled right before something ugly. He clapped me lightly on the shoulder, like we were old friends sharing a joke. "Your kind just moved into the good part of it after we did the work." Nobody laughed. Nobody corrected him either. Courtney, 29 that summer, looked at her plate. Brandon suddenly needed more napkins. I set down the serving spoon, said nothing, and went inside for a glass of water I didn't need. I stood at the Maddox's sink exactly as long as it took to file the sentence away somewhere permanent, without a scene. For later. I never repeated it to anyone. Not to Earl, who would have driven back and said something I'd have had to smooth over for years. Not to Courtney, who I suspected even then already knew, and had decided it was easier not to see. I simply carried it, the way I carried the coat incident from years before. Another entry in a ledger I never showed anyone, not because I was weak, because showing it changes nothing except who gets to feel bad about it. I thought about it again, sitting in Vernon's office, 3 weeks after the closing, looking at a printout Patricia Boone had pulled. A public notice from the county clerk's office, an intake log. Over 18 months, 4 residents, 3 of them black homeowners, one a Vietnamese-American shop owner on 5th Street, had filed informal complaints, asked to wait outside the counter, asked for extra identification, misdirected to a different window than white residents doing the same transaction. None of the complaints had gone anywhere. None investigated. They simply sat, logged, unread, in a drawer nobody opened until a lawyer like Vernon came looking for a pattern. "I want that filed formally," I said, tapping the page. Not just about me, about all of it. It'll take time, Vernon said. These things move slow, even when they're right. I've got time, I said. I've got a whole life of it, if that's what it takes. I thought of my mother again. 30 years of lemon polish and cracked hands, careful in rooms that were never hers to be careless in. I thought of the appraiser, 40,000 under 3 comparable homes on my own street. I thought of the bank teller, asking for 2 forms of ID for a check the white man ahead of me had cleared with one, and a smile. I had set both forms of ID on the counter that day without comment. I hadn't raised my voice. I'd simply noted, later, the date, the branch, the teller's name tag, the exact wording of the request. Another line in a ledger that wasn't only about money anymore. It's not really about Dale's one sentence at a barbecue, I told Vernon. A sentence is just a sentence. It's about how many doors that sentence opens for the rest of them, without anybody ever having to say it twice. I hear you, Vernon said. And for what it's worth, Loretta, I've been hearing it my whole career. I just don't often get to do something about it with paperwork this clean. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Patricia Boone, at the county clerk's office, had her own small piece to add. The next time Vernon brought me by, to sign a few remaining closing documents. Patricia was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, the kind of civil servant who noticed everything and said little, until she trusted the room she was standing in. I've worked that counter 19 years, Patricia said, once Vernon had stepped out to take a call. I've watched exactly what you're describing happen more times than I can count. Different clerk, same drawer for the complaint to disappear into. I used to think it was just how things were. I don't think that anymore. What changed? I asked. You did, honestly, Patricia said. Watching you write it all down so plainly, so calmly, no theatrics, just dates and facts. It made me go back and actually read the file I'd been sitting on for years instead of just knowing it was there. Sometimes it takes one person doing the work properly to remind the rest of us we're allowed to. I considered that. I spent my whole career thinking the work was just numbers, I said. Turns out it's also just this. Somebody finally reading the file. Same thing, really, Patricia said. Numbers or names, it's all just refusing to look away from what's actually written down. Meanwhile, 40 miles south, in a house Dale Maddox built himself 20 years earlier, Courtney was learning things I already knew. The $88,000 had come and gone faster than anyone outside the family understood. 12,000 toward a supplier lien on the stalled subdivision, 31,000 toward payroll for 4 contractors threatening to walk off 2 other job sites. The rest toward a line of credit Dale had personally guaranteed. He was quietly, desperately trying to keep it current, before his own bank noticed how thin the real numbers had gotten. Brandon didn't know all of it. He knew enough to be frightened, and not enough to be useful. He'd grown up believing his father's business was simply successful, the way children believe things about their parents, until the evidence stops cooperating. He'd married Courtney, partly, though he'd never have said it this plainly. Her family's steady, paid-off stability felt like solid ground, next to his own family's habit of building bigger houses on smaller foundations of actual cash. Courtney had married into that instability without fully understanding it either. She'd understood instead a feeling, a low hum of anxiety absorbed from 4 years of Sunday dinners at the Maddox table, where Dale talked about margins and cash flow the way other families talked about weather, casually, with an undertone that made everyone quietly nervous. She'd wanted, more than anything, to be the daughter-in-law who fixed it. Her mother's paid-off house, sitting there, half empty since her father died, had seemed like an obvious answer. in the specific logic of a woman trying to solve a problem she was too proud to name honestly. She told herself a story to make it feel less like theft. Mom doesn't need all that space. Mom would want to help if she really understood how bad it's gotten. Mom's better off in something smaller anyway, at her age. Each sentence had felt, at the time, almost generous. It was only later she'd understand how much of that story was built to spare herself a harder sentence. I decided my mother's home was mine to spend before I ever asked her. She'd told Dale about the house 8 months before the notice went in the mail. He was the one, in fact, who first floated the idea. Over a drink at his kitchen island, watching Brandon's numbers on a laptop screen, neither of them wanted to look at directly. "Your mother's rattling around in that big house alone," Dale said. "Be a kindness, moving her into something smaller. And it'd free up some real equity for this family, at a time we genuinely need it." Courtney let herself believe the word kindness. She let herself believe, too, the quieter thing underneath it. The thing Dale never said outright but implied plainly enough over 4 years of dinners. That a house like my house, in a town like this, sitting mostly empty, was somehow wasted on me. That it made more sense in the family's hands. Under the family's plans. Courtney hadn't examined that calculation closely enough to notice what it rested on. She would. Not yet. She drew the loan in March, co-signed by Dale, using an affidavit she'd signed herself, stating the Bedford Street property was in the process of transferring to her name, pursuant to a family agreement. There was no such agreement. There had never been a conversation with me about it at all. Courtney had simply decided, the way people decide things when they need very badly for a thing to be true. The conversation was a formality. She'd handle it later. She mailed the eviction notice in May, on Mother's Day. Dale had said the sooner the transfer process started, the sooner the loan's collateral would stop being, in his words, a technicality. She hand-delivered the cake and mailed the legal notice separately, on the same morning. Some small, unexamined part of her still wanted the day to feel, on the surface, like a holiday. She rehearsed the sentence "you've had it long enough" 3 times in the car before she found the nerve to say it out loud. She had not expected me to keep working through it. She expected tears. Or an argument she could answer with the rehearsed calm she'd practiced in the mirror. My silence unsettled her more than any argument could have, though she couldn't have said why. Driving home that day. 6 weeks passed. Courtney checked in twice. Brief calls, asking if I had, quote, started thinking about my options. Careful never to say the word eviction out loud, as though avoiding the word made the document less real. I answered both calls the same way. Pleasant, brief, giving away nothing. "I've got some things in motion," I said the second time. "You'll see." Courtney took that, at the time, as a small victory. Her mother was finally being reasonable. She reported as much to Dale, who nodded the way men like Dale nod at good news they consider inevitable rather than earned. Neither of them checked the county recorder's website. Neither of them thought to. Why would you check public records on a house you already believed, in every practical sense, belonged to your own plans? The bank sent its follow-up correspondence quietly to the address Courtney had listed as her own residence, forwarded by a clerk who had no reason to flag it. 3 letters, all received, all opened, all read, by me. Loretta Hollis, 61 years old, sitting at a table I still owned outright, 3 counties away from anyone who understood yet how much they'd already lost. My own accounting kept moving on its own patient schedule, entirely separate from anything Courtney or Dale imagined. Vernon filed the closing documents. Patricia Boone processed the recorded deed transfer to Marcus and Renee Delaney, stamped and dated and public the moment it went through. sitting in the same online record system Courtney and Dale never thought to check. It sat there 11 days before anyone in the Maddox family had reason to look. The first person to notice wasn't Courtney or Dale at all. It was Brandon, 3 days before the scheduled move, doing what he rarely did, actually reviewing paperwork Dale kept telling him not to worry about. He was trying to confirm the address for the moving company and pulled up the county property records out of simple habit, the kind of small, competent act his own upbringing had trained him to skip in favor of trusting his father's assurances. The listing showed a sale, recorded, dated 11 days earlier. Grantor, Loretta Ann Hollis. Grantee, Marcus and Renee Delaney. Sale price, $640,000. Brandon sat with his laptop a long moment before he called Courtney into the room. "When's the last time you actually talked to your mother?" he asked, "about the house?" "2 weeks ago," Courtney said. "Why?" He turned the screen toward her. Courtney read it twice before the words fully assembled into a sentence her mind could accept. Then a third time. "That's not possible," she said. "The eviction notice. The 30 days. She hasn't even packed." "Courtney," Brandon said quietly, something in his voice gone thin. "This says the sale closed 11 days ago, full price. No discount. She sold it. To somebody else." Courtney called my cell 4 times in the next hour. Voicemail every time. A calm recorded greeting that gave nothing away. She called the house line, disconnected weeks earlier. A fact that felt, in the moment, like its own small violence, though it was simply the ordinary consequence of a household that had moved on. She drove to Bedford Street that afternoon, alone, without telling Dale yet. Some instinct insisting she see it with her own eyes first. She parked across the street and sat in her car. It took her a full minute to notice the small changes. A different wreath on the door, a child's bicycle on its side in the yard, one that had never belonged to her family, a woman she didn't recognize, watering the flower bed my own mother had planted 15 years earlier. Moving through the space with the easy confidence of someone who already knew, in her bones, that it was hers. Courtney did not get out of the car. She sat there a long time until the woman noticed her and waved, the friendly wave of a new neighbor who had no idea what she was waving at. Courtney drove away without waving back. She called Dale from the car. For the first time in the whole arrangement, her voice was not careful at all. "She sold it," Courtney said. 11 days ago. Full price. It's gone, Dale. The house is gone." There was a long silence on Dale's end, the particular silence of a man doing fast, unhappy arithmetic. "That can't be right," Dale said finally. "The loan paperwork said the transfer was pending." "I know what the paperwork said," Courtney said, her voice cracking. Finally, on the word said. The first real crack in 6 weeks of careful performance. "I signed it, Dale. I signed it saying it was pending. It was never pending. There was never an agreement. I just needed it to be true." Neither said the word fraud out loud yet, though both, in their separate silences, had begun to understand it was coming for that word eventually. They'd already scheduled the move for the following Saturday. A moving truck. Dale and his wife's furniture, already partly loaded. A small gathering Courtney had planned, without quite admitting why, somewhere between a housewarming and an apology tour. Invitations to a handful of neighbors, 2 cousins, and, strangely, though she wouldn't examine this choice honestly for weeks, to me. A card that read simply, "Come say hello to the new chapter, Mom. We'd love to have you." I had received that card 4 days earlier. I read it once, standing at my kitchen counter in the rental apartment. I folded it neatly, set it in the drawer where I kept old receipts and church bulletins. I hadn't decided, in that moment, whether I'd go. By the time Saturday arrived, I'd decided. I would go. not to fight, not even entirely to witness. I'd go because Vernon asked me one simple question 3 days earlier that settled the matter completely. "Do you want the truth to arrive quietly?" he asked, "in a letter your daughter opens alone? Or do you want it to arrive the way the eviction notice arrived? In public, on a day she chose, in front of the people she was trying to impress with it?" I thought about that exactly as long as it took to finish my coffee. "She mailed it to me on Mother's Day," I said, "in front of a cake she didn't even bake herself. I think it's only fair the truth shows up with the same kind of audience." Vernon smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in weeks. "Then I'll see you Saturday," he said. "I'll bring the recorded deed. You bring whatever's left of your patience." "I've got plenty," I said. "I've been saving it my whole life." Marcus and Renee Delaney, in those same weeks, were learning something about Marbury they hadn't expected to learn so quickly. They'd fallen for the house at first sight, the good bones, the porch, the street. What they hadn't fully understood, moving in from Cleveland, was how a small town keeps its own quiet ledger on who belongs where, and how fast that ledger gets consulted when new neighbors show up looking a certain way. Their second week on Bedford Street, a neighbor 2 doors down had come by with a plate of cookies and a friendly smile. A retired school teacher named Phyllis Krantz. She asked, almost as an aside, whether they were renting or whether they'd actually purchased. "We closed 2 weeks ago," Renee said. "We own it outright, actually. No mortgage." Phyllis's smile had flickered, just slightly. The kind of flicker Renee had learned to read early in life. Phyllis had said, "Well, isn't that something?" in a tone that suggested she found it far more surprising than the sentence itself should have warranted. Marcus mentioned it to Renee that night, half laughing, half not. "She wanted to ask us how," he said. "She just couldn't find a polite way to say it." "She'll get used to us," Renee said. "Or she won't. Either way, we're not going anywhere." It happened again, smaller, at the hardware store on 5th Street. The clerk asked Marcus for 2 forms of ID to open a store credit account, a transaction the white contractor ahead of him in line had completed with a driver's license and a handshake. Marcus had noticed. He hadn't said anything. He'd simply produced both forms. The way people do who have spent a lifetime keeping their patience in reserve for exactly these moments. He went home and told Renee. The two of them sat with it a while, quietly. The way you sit with a splinter you've decided isn't worth digging out. Not that particular evening. They didn't yet know my whole story. They knew only that the woman who'd sold them the house had been kind, precise, and clearly beloved by whoever these callers were who kept stopping by. Wanda with a casserole once, Vernon Tate with a folder, a choir of church ladies waving from a car at the curb. They would learn the rest of it soon enough, on a lawn in front of a moving truck that never got unloaded. When they did, Renee would think back to Phyllis Krantz's flickering smile and understand, all at once, that it had never really been about the mortgage. 10 days before the move, Wanda drove me out to see the bungalow on Chester Lane, a squat, sturdy house with a wraparound porch and a garden bed already turned, 2 miles from Mount Zion, close enough to walk to choir practice on a fine morning. "It's small," I said, standing in the empty front room, sunlight through bare windows onto scuffed but honest hardwood. "It's yours," Wanda said, "all the way through. No arguments, no lawyers, no locks changed on you. Small and yours beats big and borrowed every time, baby. You know that better than anybody." I walked the rooms slowly. I ran a hand along the kitchen counter. I tested a windowsill wide enough, I noted almost immediately, to hold a small framed letter. I thought of Earl's square, careful handwriting. I thought, for the first time without pain attached, of hanging his letter where the morning light would reach it every day. "I'll take it," I told the agent that afternoon. No hesitation, none of the careful weighing I'd applied to every other decision that month. Some choices I was learning, late in life, didn't require the same caution as ones made under threat. This one I got to make simply because I wanted to. I closed on the bungalow 6 days before the move on Bedford Street, paying cash, the deed recorded in my name alone, the way I now wanted every deed in my life to read. I moved my few kept boxes in over 2 afternoons, Wanda directing traffic, 2 women from the choir carrying the heavier furniture. No one from the Maddox family aware any of it was happening. I hung Earl's letter in a plain frame on the windowsill, exactly where the morning light would find it. I stood back and looked at it a long moment. I felt something in my chest I recognized, slowly, as something closer to peace than I'd expected this early. Vernon called me the evening before the move. He had one last piece of information he'd been sitting on for 2 days, unsure whether to share it before Saturday or after. "I found something else," he said, going through the loan file again. The affidavit Courtney signed wasn't drafted by her. It was drafted by Dale's own business attorney, a man named Roy Fenwick, who's represented Maddox and Dale Construction for 15 years. "You're saying Dale had a lawyer help falsify it?" I said slowly. "I'm saying Dale had a lawyer help falsify it," Vernon confirmed, "which changes the shape of the exposure considerably. Courtney's the one who signed it, so she carries responsibility. But if Fenwick knew the transfer didn't exist and drafted the affidavit anyway, that's a different kind of problem, for a different kind of person. Attorneys don't get to plead they didn't understand what a sworn document means." "Will that come out?" I asked. "It will if the bank's fraud review does its job properly," Vernon said, "and banks generally do once they realize money's actually at risk. I wanted you to know before tomorrow, so nothing that comes out afterward catches you off guard. This isn't just Courtney anymore, Loretta. It's Dale, and it's Dale's own lawyer, and possibly the loan officer who underwrote it without verifying basic public records that would have taken 10 minutes to check." I was quiet a moment, turning that over. "It's strange," I said finally. "I keep waiting to feel something bigger about all of it. Anger, maybe. Satisfaction. Instead, I mostly just feel tired. The way you feel tired after a long audit, when you finally find every number that was hiding, and you're just glad the column's done. That's not a small thing to feel," Vernon said. "Tired is what honest people feel when a lie finally runs out of places to hide. It's supposed to feel like relief more than triumph. If it felt like triumph, I'd worry about you a little." "Then don't worry," I said. "I'm fine. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up and sat a while at my kitchen table. I looked at the framed letter on the windowsill, the evening light almost gone from it now. I thought about how many people, over how many years, had quietly decided things about me without ever once checking the actual paperwork. Dale, deciding what I was worth standing in his foyer. The appraiser, deciding what my house was worth on paper. Courtney, deciding what her mother's patience was worth spending against. Roy Fenwick, apparently, deciding an affidavit was worth drafting around a fact he could have confirmed with one phone call to the county. Not one of them had checked. That, I thought, turning off the kitchen light, was the whole quiet architecture of it. Not always cruelty. Sometimes just the specific laziness of never having to look closely at a person you'd already decided didn't require it. It was Wanda, 3 days before the move, who asked the question I had been circling without landing on myself. "You still thinking about going Saturday?" Wanda asked, folding a dish towel at my new table. "I am. You nervous?" I considered that honestly. "No," I said. "I've spent 61 years being the one who absorbs things quietly, so everybody else's Saturday goes smoothly. I'd like to watch, just once, what happens when I stop doing that. That's not revenge, Wanda said. What you're describing. That's just finally getting to be a person in the room instead of the furniture in it. I know, I said. I've been telling myself that all week, so it must be true by now. Wanda laughed, low and warm. She reached over and squeezed my hand once, briefly, the way she'd done at every hard moment for 40 years. Neither of us needed to say anything else about it. That Friday night, I laid out my clothes for the morning the way I always did before something important. Not my funeral black. Not my Sunday best either. A simple pale blue dress. The one I'd worn the day the bank finally approved Curtis's small business loan 2 years back. The day I'd felt, for once, that something good had happened because of careful work instead of luck. I sat at my kitchen table a while before bed, my notebook open one more time. I read back through the whole ledger from the beginning. $412 a month, 372 months, 11,000 for a wedding, 88,000 borrowed against a lie, 40,000 shaved off my house because of who I was standing in the doorway, 640,000. The truth, finally, on paper, in my name. I thought about my mother's 30 years of lemon polish, about Earl's hands on the porch railing, about a sentence said once at a cookout that had followed me, uninvited, for 4 years. I thought about how much of a life could be spent being careful in rooms other people assumed were theirs to control, and how strange it felt, at 61, to finally stand in a room, even just a lawn, and know, without a shadow of doubt, exactly whose name was on it. I closed the notebook. I turned off the kitchen light. I went to bed early, and for the first time in 6 weeks, I slept the whole night through. The Saturday of the move arrived warm and clear, the kind of early July morning that made Bedford Street look exactly like what it was. A good street, old trees, porches deep enough for real furniture, the kind of place people spent 31 years paying off because they believed correctly it was worth it. Marcus and Renee Delaney were home that morning. They had no idea yet anything unusual was about to happen on their new lawn. They'd been in the house 11 days, unpacking the unhurried way of people settling somewhere they intend to stay. Renee was in the kitchen. Marcus was on a ladder, cleaning gutters, a task his father-in-law had insisted every homeowner do the first month. The moving truck arrived at 9:40. A rented box truck, a hand truck rattling loose in back, followed by 2 SUVs, Dale's and Brandon's, and behind them, a third car that surprised everyone who eventually noticed it. Mine, an older sedan I'd owned 9 years, parking quietly at the curb 2 houses down, close enough to see, far enough not to be immediately noticed. Vernon arrived on foot from where he'd parked around the corner, a slim leather folder under one arm. Dressed the way he always dressed for anything that mattered. Pressed shirt, no tie. The calm, unhurried posture of a man who'd done this exact kind of morning before. He'd learned long ago that rushing it only gives the wrong people time to recover their footing. Dale climbed out of his SUV first, already talking, already directing, treating the driveway like something he'd personally poured. "Truck can back right up to the porch," he called to the driver. "Watch that flower bed, though. My wife's particular about flower beds." Renee came out first, drawn by the noise, still holding a dish towel. Confusion clear on her face at the sight of 2 SUVs and a moving truck idling in front. In front of the house she and Marcus had closed on nearly 2 weeks earlier. "Can I help you?" she said, in the careful, polite voice of someone hoping there's been a simple mistake. Dale barely looked at her. "We're just getting things staged," he said, already waving the truck driver forward. Family's moving in this weekend. I think there's some confusion, Renee said, more firmly now, stepping down off the porch. We closed on this house 11 days ago. We live here. For a moment, nobody moved. Courtney, climbing out of Brandon's SUV behind her father-in-law, froze halfway out of the seat, one hand still on the door, staring at a woman she'd never seen, standing on the porch of the house she grew up in, speaking with the calm, settled authority of someone who'd already unpacked her kitchen. That's not possible, Dale said, the smile still half arranged on his face. The kind of smile a man wears while his mind refuses, for one more second, to catch up with what his ears already heard. This house belongs to the Hollis family, has for 30 years. It belonged to Loretta Hollis, Renee said. She sold it to us. It's ours now. That was the moment Vernon Tate stepped forward from the sidewalk, folder open. I stepped out of my sedan, 2 houses down. I began walking, unhurried, toward the gathering forming on the lawn I no longer owned. Courtney saw me first. "Mom," she said. The word came out smaller than she meant it to. I didn't answer right away. I walked up the sidewalk, past the moving truck, past Dale, past Brandon standing pale by the mailbox. I stopped a few feet from my daughter, close enough to speak quietly. Though what I said next, I said clearly enough for everyone on that lawn to hear. "You mailed me an eviction notice on Mother's Day," I said. "In front of a cake you didn't bake. You told me I'd had this house long enough. I let that sit exactly as long as I needed to. No longer. You were right about one thing. I had had it long enough. Long enough to sell it." "Mom, what did you do?" Courtney said. Her voice, for the first time in this whole arrangement, sounded like the 22-year-old I remembered marrying Brandon, frightened, out of her depth, reaching for a script that no longer applied. "I did what your father told me to do, 4 years before he died," I said. "He put this house in my name alone, because he saw what I was too polite to say out loud for years, that your husband's family never once thought of me as anything but a woman standing in a room she was only borrowing." Dale's face went through several colors. He found his voice too loud, the way it had always been too loud, at cookouts, at Thanksgivings, in doorways where he'd handed me his coat without asking. "Now hold on," he said. "This is a family matter. There's no need to make a scene in front of the whole street." "I'm not making a scene, Dale," I said. My voice still hadn't risen. Not once. Not 1 degree above the register I used correcting a shoebox of receipts. "I'm standing on a public sidewalk, in front of a house I legally sold 11 days ago, while your family tries to move furniture into somebody else's living room. If there's a scene here, you brought the truck." Vernon stepped forward, opening the folder. He read from the top page, in the calm cadence of a man who'd waited his whole career for a morning exactly this clean. "For the record," Vernon said. He said it loud enough for the small, growing knot of neighbors now gathering on porches up and down Bedford Street. "The property at this address was conveyed 11 days ago by its sole legal owner, Loretta Ann Hollis, to Marcus and Renee Delaney, for $640,000 at full appraised market value. The deed is recorded with the Willow County Recorder's Office. It's a matter of public record, available to anyone who cares to check it." He looked up, directly at Dale. "I understand a loan was recently extended against this same property, using an affidavit that a transfer to Courtney Maddox was, quote, pending. I'd strongly encourage everyone standing on this lawn to have their own attorney review that loan very carefully. Representing a pending transfer that never existed to secure $88,000 of financing is not a family matter, it's a federal one. The silence lasted long enough for a bird 2 yards over to finish an entire phrase of song before anyone spoke again. Dale's mouth opened, then closed. Whatever fast arithmetic he'd been running in the car, it hadn't accounted for this. A lawyer, a folder, a recorded deed arriving the same morning as the moving truck. "Courtney," Dale said finally. Something new in his voice now. Something I recognized instantly, having spent a lifetime listening to people discover that a number they'd been avoiding had finally come due. "Tell me you didn't sign that affidavit." Courtney didn't answer him. She was looking at me. "You could have just told me," Courtney said, her voice gone thin, almost childlike. "You could have called me and said no." "I did tell you no," I said. "You didn't ask, Courtney. You mailed me a deadline. There's a difference between a conversation and a countdown, and you chose the countdown." "I needed the money," Courtney said, fast now, the careful performance of 6 weeks finally cracking open all at once. "Brandon's business is failing, Mom. Dale's business is failing. I thought if I could get us through this one stretch, nobody would ever have to know how bad it got." "I know exactly how bad it got," I said quietly. $88,000 bad. $40,000 underappraised bad. 2 liens and a stop work order bad. I've been keeping books for 30 years, baby. I know what a family looks like when it's drowning and trying to smile through it. I raised you in a house that never once had that problem. Your father and I paid every bill on time for 31 years, in cash we actually had. You didn't inherit that discipline. You inherited the house instead. Or you thought you did. And when the discipline wasn't there to save you, you decided the house could be spent in its place. Nobody on that lawn moved. Marcus had stopped cleaning the gutter entirely, frozen halfway down the ladder. Renee had set the dish towel down on the railing without seeming to notice. 2 neighbors, an older couple from 3 doors down, stood at the edge of their own yard, watching openly now, the way people watch a storm they know isn't coming for them. "You humiliated me," I said, and for the first time that morning, something in my voice sharpened. Not louder, never louder, harder. The way a countertop is harder than a cushion. You mailed your own mother an eviction notice on Mother's Day, and you let your father-in-law stand at a cookout 4 summers ago. Tell me my kind moved into the good part of this town after his kind built it. And you said nothing. Not that day. Not since. You let that sentence sit in the room. You let me carry it alone. The same way you let me find out about an $88,000 loan through the mail, instead of through you. Dale's face had gone a deep, uncomfortable red. "That was one comment, years ago. Half in jest," he started. "It wasn't in jest," I said, turning to him now, my voice, even now, not rising. "It was exactly what you meant. Said the one time you'd had enough beer to say it plainly. I've spent 4 years watching how carefully everyone in your family avoided ever mentioning it again. That told me everything I needed to know about how many of you actually disagreed with it." I looked around slowly, at the small gathered crowd, at Vernon standing quiet and steady beside me, at the house behind us all. Brick and porch and 31 years of paid installments, now belonging, properly, legally, permanently, to a young couple who'd simply wanted a good street and a solid house, who had never once assumed anything about the woman who sold it to them. "I'm not angry that you needed help," I said finally to Courtney. Something in my voice softened now, just slightly, the way a hard winter morning softens by noon. Every family needs help sometime. I'd have helped you, Courtney, if you'd asked me honestly, the way a daughter asks a mother. I gave you $11,000 for your wedding once, and I never mentioned it again, because that's what love does. It doesn't keep score. I paused. But you didn't ask. You took. You decided. The way your father-in-law's family has always decided things about people they've never bothered to really see. That what was mine was simply available because you'd convinced yourself I didn't need it, because you'd never once had to sit with what it actually cost me to build it. Courtney was crying now, quietly. The kind of crying that comes when a person finally hears, out loud, in public, a version of themselves they'd been avoiding in private for months. Marcus Delaney climbed down from the ladder at last and walked over. He stood beside his own front steps, close enough to be part of the moment without inserting himself into it. He looked at me, then at the stunned, unraveling family standing in what used to be my driveway. "Ma'am," he said quietly, to me, "for what it's worth, we love this house. We're going to take good care of it." "I know you will," I said. For the first time that morning, I smiled. Small and real. That's all I ever wanted for it. The moving truck driver had been standing by his cab for several minutes now, with the patience of a man paid by the hour regardless of outcome. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So are we, unloading or—" "No," Dale said quietly, all the earlier bluster gone out of him. "No, we're not unloading." He turned to Vernon. "I want to see that loan paperwork," he said. "All of it. I imagine your bank's compliance department will want the same thing very soon," Vernon said. "I'd get ahead of it if I were you." Dale didn't answer that. He simply stood there on a lawn that had never been his, looking for the first time in his adult life like a man who had run out of rooms to walk into and assume were his. The moving truck pulled away first, empty, the driver relieved to be released from a job that had clearly stopped making sense to him. Then the SUVs, one at a time, backing carefully out of a driveway that never belonged to either family, loading into them. Neighbors drifted back toward their own porches slowly. The way people do after a storm, passes close but doesn't quite reach them, still talking under their breath. Courtney stayed a moment longer than the others. She stood on the sidewalk, not moving. Until it was just her and me and Vernon. The Delaneys had retreated politely inside to give us what privacy the morning had left. "I don't know how to fix this," Courtney said finally, quietly. All the rehearsed calm from 6 weeks ago completely gone. "You don't fix a thing like this in one conversation," I said. "You didn't break it in one either, whatever it looked like the day you mailed me that notice. It took years to build up to that Sunday. It'll take longer than one Saturday to walk it back." "Are you saying there's a way back?" Courtney asked, something in her voice I hadn't heard from my daughter in a long time. Young. Honestly afraid. The voice of a 6-year-old on a porch step with a popsicle before any of this happened to either of us. "I'm saying I'm your mother," I said. "That doesn't stop being true because you did something I have to hold you accountable for. But accountability comes first, Courtney. Not an apology on a lawn because you got caught. An actual accounting of what you did and why and what you're willing to do differently. I spent my whole life reconciling other people's books. I know the difference between a real correction and a number somebody just wants to feel better about." Courtney nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "What happens now?" she asked. "With the loan, with Dale?" "That's not really mine to answer," I said. "Vernon can tell you the shape of it, but start preparing yourself. A federal lender doesn't care how sorry you are. They care whether the affidavit you signed was true. It wasn't. That's going to have consequences, with or without my forgiveness attached." Vernon confirmed as much within the week. He filed nothing against Courtney personally, at my request, though he made clear the choice was mine alone. Plenty of women in my position would have chosen otherwise and been well within their rights. I had thought about it 2 full days before deciding. "I'm not going to be the reason my daughter goes to prison," I told Vernon, "but I'm also not going to lift a finger to help her escape what she actually did. Let the bank's own process run its course. Let the truth do what the truth does when you stop protecting people from it. The bank's compliance process moved with the particular relentless slowness of large institutions discovering they've been lied to. An internal fraud review opened within 3 weeks, triggered automatically once the recorded sale surfaced in a routine title search. Courtney was required to give a written statement. She did, honestly this time. She admitted the affidavit was false. No transfer agreement had ever existed. The bank called the loan in full, $88,000, due immediately, a sum Courtney and Brandon didn't have and couldn't raise on the salary of a construction company hemorrhaging money by the month. Dale, as co-signer, was left holding the balance the family couldn't cover, on top of the 2 liens already choking his stalled subdivision. It was, in the end, exactly the mirror of what he'd spent his career building. A man who'd made his name constructing things other people lived inside, watching, within 2 months, his own financial foundation crack open in full public view, the one he'd never let anyone examine too closely. The county's stop work order became permanent. 2 of the 4 unpaid contractors filed liens that made the local business pages. The kind of quiet local scandal that travels through a town like Marbury faster than any of the Maddoxes wanted. Brandon's construction license came under formal review after a second complaint surfaced. Unrelated to the loan, but uncovered in the same wave of scrutiny, an unpaid subcontractor from 18 months earlier who'd given up chasing the debt until he saw Maddox and Dale Construction mentioned in the local paper. He decided the moment had come to try again. None of it happened all at once, the way it might in a courtroom drama. It happened the way real consequences usually happen. Slowly, through paperwork, through phone calls from people whose job it is to notice exactly this kind of thing. Nobody had to raise a hand. Nobody had to raise a voice past the one register I had used the entire time. Roy Fenwick, the attorney who drafted Courtney's false affidavit, fared no better once the bank's fraud unit finished its review. His malpractice carrier dropped him within the year, once the facts were plain enough that no reasonable defense could soften them. The County Bar Association opened its own inquiry, slower than the bank's, but no less certain in where it was heading. Fenwick would eventually surrender his license, rather than fight a public hearing he had no real chance of winning. He closed a 30-year practice with a quiet letter, instead of the retirement party he'd once imagined for himself. I learned all of this the way I learned most things now. Secondhand, from Vernon, over coffee, delivered without triumph, simply as information I was entitled to have. I don't take pleasure in it, Vernon said, of Fenwick specifically. He was a competent lawyer for 30 years. Then he made one bad choice for a client he liked. It cost him everything he'd built. That's not a happy story, even when the outcome is fair. No, I agreed. But fair matters more to me than happy at this point. I've had enough of things being happy for the wrong people at somebody else's expense. I'll take fair. Marcus and Renee, for their part, settled into Bedford Street more fully. Once the story of that Saturday morning made its way through the whole neighborhood, as small-town stories do, within a week. Phyllis Krantz showed up at their door not long after, with a different plate of cookies and an apology. One that was, Renee thought, probably as close to honest as Phyllis was capable of getting. I didn't understand who you were buying from, Phyllis said, which wasn't quite an apology and wasn't quite not one. Loretta Hollis is one of the most respected women in this town. I should have led with that, instead of my own nosiness. You should have, Renee said evenly, not unkindly, but I appreciate you coming back to say it. Renee and Marcus invited me to dinner that autumn. In the house that still carried in every corner the evidence of 31 years of somebody loving it carefully. I accepted. I stood for a long moment in the front hallway before I came in, looking at the light fall the way it always had, through the transom window above the door. Renee, watching me, understood something about the sale she hadn't fully understood before that moment. That a house could be sold completely, legally, permanently, and still, in some quiet way, belong a little to the person who loved it the longest. Vernon's other filing, about the county recorder's office, took longer, the way these things always do. He submitted a formal complaint, citing Patricia's intake log. 4 names, 4 dates, 4 documented instances of Black and immigrant residents treated differently at the same public counter than white residents doing identical transactions. He attached my notes about the bank teller, filed separately with the State Banking Commission. A small additional thread in a larger fabric he was weaving one document at a time. It took 4 months for the county to respond formally. When it did, it wasn't dramatic. No press conference, no public apology with cameras. Instead, a quiet internal memo circulated to every clerk in the recorder's office, standardizing identification requirements for all transactions, regardless of the resident's appearance. A mandatory training session the following month, which Patricia confirmed, with some satisfaction, had actually happened, not just been scheduled and forgotten. It's not everything, Vernon told me, over coffee at the diner on 5th Street. The same one where Courtney once tried to rebuild a lie over pie. It's not going to undo 40 years of your mother cleaning houses on the nice side of town. It's not going to make Dale Maddox a different man at 70 than he's been his whole life. But it's a real memo, in a real file, that a real clerk has to follow now. 5 years from now, when somebody's granddaughter walks into that office, she's going to get treated the same as everybody else in that line. That's not nothing, Loretta. That's the shape of what actual change looks like. Slow, boring, real. I'll take slow and real, I said. I've had enough of fast and false to last me a while. The appraiser faced no formal discipline, though Vernon made certain the underlying comparable sales data became part of the public record attached to the fraud review. The $40,000 gap between my house and 3 similarly sized homes owned by white families on the same street. A local reporter, working a small item on the Maddox construction collapse for the Marbury Weekly, picked up on the appraisal gap almost by accident, buried it in paragraph 9 of an otherwise ordinary business story. It sat there quietly, true and documented, for anyone who cared to read that far. I read it myself, the morning it ran, at my kitchen table on Chester Lane, coffee going cold beside me. I read paragraph 9 twice. Then I folded the paper, set it aside, and went back to Curtis's newest shoebox of receipts. There was always another column that needed reconciling. I'd long ago learned the truest kind of vindication rarely arrives with fanfare. It simply arrives, quietly, on schedule, and you notice it, and keep living your life. Wanda came by that evening, as she often did now, casserole dish or no casserole dish. 2 old friends in the habit now of ending most days together in one kitchen or the other. "You saw the paper," Wanda said. Not really a question. "I saw it. How do you feel?" I considered the question honestly. "Lighter than I expected," I said. "Not happy exactly. It's a strange thing to feel light about. $40,000 of somebody deciding what your house was worth, based on what you looked like standing in the doorway. But it's out now, written down, on paper where I always said the truth survives best. I don't have to carry it alone in my own head anymore. That's worth something." "It's worth a lot," Wanda said. "You spent your whole life carrying things quietly so nobody else had to be uncomfortable. Maybe it's somebody else's turn to sit with the discomfort for once." Courtney called 2 weeks after the article ran. I almost didn't answer. Something in me, the same old patient instinct that made me open the bank's mail in the first place, told me to pick up. I read the article, Courtney said, without preamble, about the appraisal. Mom, I didn't know. I swear to you, I never once thought about what that number actually meant. Not until I saw it printed next to the other houses on the street. I believe you didn't think about it, I said. That's actually the whole problem, Courtney. Not that you meant harm, that you never had to think about it because it never touched you directly, so it simply didn't register as something worth noticing. That's what your father-in-law's whole family has in common, if I'm honest. Not cruelty, exactly. Just the ability to never have to look at certain things because looking was never required of them. There was a long silence on the line. I've been seeing someone, Courtney said finally. A counselor. Since the loan review. Brandon and I both are, actually. Together and separately. It's not fixing the business. I don't think anything's going to fix the business, not the way Dale built it. But I wanted you to know I'm actually trying to understand what I did. Not just apologize for getting caught doing it. That's a real start, I said. And I meant it. It's not the whole road. But it's a real start. And I'll take a real start over a fast apology any day. Can I come see you? Courtney asked. Not to ask for anything, just to see you. I miss you, Mom. I know I don't have any right to say that right now. But it's true. I looked, without quite meaning to, at Earl's framed letter on the windowsill. The morning light long gone from it by this hour. Just a plain frame catching the last of the evening instead. You can come Sunday, I said. After church. I'll have coffee on. We'll talk. Slowly. I'm not promising you anything past that, Courtney, and I want you to hear that clearly. But you can come. Courtney came that Sunday, and the one after. Gradually, over months too quiet to make for their own dedicated telling, a different kind of relationship began to take shape between us. Not a return to what existed before. I was clear-eyed enough to know that particular bond had been built on assumptions too fragile to simply reassemble. Something new instead, slower, more honest, built the way I built everything, one accurate entry at a time. On the fourth Sunday, Courtney arrived with something in her hands besides her purse, a small stack of papers, which she set on my kitchen table without being asked. What's this? I asked. A repayment plan, Courtney said, for the $11,000 from the wedding. I know you never wanted it back, Mom. I know you meant it as a gift, but I want to pay you back anyway, on a schedule, in writing, so it's real. So it's not just a feeling I have. I want it to be something I can point to and say, I did that. I looked at the papers a long moment. A modest monthly figure. Nothing that would strain a household still climbing out from under a collapsed business. Spread across 4 years, dated, signed at the bottom in Courtney's own hand. I don't need this, I said. I know, Courtney said. This isn't about what you need. It's about what I need to do if I'm ever going to actually trust myself around money again. Around you. I need proof I've changed, not just a story I tell myself. I signed my own name at the bottom. Not because the $11,000 mattered to me, because I recognized in my daughter's plain determined handwriting something of Earl's carefulness finally showing up a generation late. I wanted to honor that wherever it appeared, however long it had taken to arrive. Your father would have liked this, I said, sliding the paper back across the table. Not the money, the accounting. He always said a debt written down honestly is worth more than a debt forgiven and forgotten. I miss him, Courtney said quietly. So do I said. Every day. But I think, in his own way, he's the reason we're sitting here at all. Dale never called. Not once. Not to apologize. not to argue, not even to ask after his son's marriage, as it slowly, carefully rebuilt itself outside the shadow of his collapsing empire. He sold his remaining share of Maddox and Dale Construction 18 months later, quietly, to a regional builder who kept the crews but dropped the name from the letterhead within a year. He and his wife downsized considerably, into a house half the size of the one he'd once assumed a retired man like him deserved, in a development 2 counties over, one he had not built himself, I noted, with something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite pity. I heard, secondhand, through Courtney, that Dale had mentioned once, at a family dinner months later, something close to regret about the barbecue comment, though he never said it directly to me, and I never asked him to. Some debts, I'd come to understand, over 61 years of keeping other people's books, simply never get repaid in full. A woman could spend the rest of her life waiting on that repayment, or she could close the account, mark it settled in her own ledger, move forward with the entries that still had a chance of balancing. I chose to move forward. The bungalow on Chester Lane filled in slowly over the following year, the way a home does when it's built by someone with no urgency left, only intention. I planted the garden bed Wanda had pointed out that first afternoon. Tomatoes, a modest row of zinnias, because Earl had always liked zinnias, and I found I still wanted a little of him blooming somewhere close by. I kept Curtis's account and picked up 2 new small business clients that winter. A woman opening a bakery on 5th Street, a young mechanic starting his own shop past the tire place. Both had heard, through the particular grapevine that runs through towns like Marbury, that I kept the most honest books in the county, and charged a fair rate for peace of mind worth considerably more than the invoice. I used a portion of the Bedford Street proceeds, quietly, without announcement, to start a small fund at Mount Zion, administered by the deacons, available to any church member facing an unexpected eviction or housing emergency, no questions asked beyond the basic facts of need. I named it, at Wanda's gentle insistence, though I'd resisted naming it anything at all, the Earl Hollis Fund. The first family it helped, 6 months in, was a young widow 2 pews over, quietly panicking about a rent increase she had no way to cover. He'd have liked that, Wanda said, the Sunday the deacons announced the first disbursement from the pulpit. Careful and brief, the way Mount Zion did most things. He would have, I agreed. He always did like fixing something before it became a crisis for somebody else. I suppose I finally learned that from him properly. By the fund's 2nd year, it had helped 4 more families, a total that stayed modest by design. I had insisted from the start that it never grow so large it required a board or a name on a building. Nothing that turned Earl's memory into a production instead of a quiet, steady act of care. I reviewed every request myself, alongside the deacons. I applied the same careful eye I brought to every shoebox of receipts. I turned down exactly one, a man who'd asked for help covering a boat payment rather than his rent. Gently, without judgment, I redirected him toward what the fund was actually for. Vernon's slow work on the county pattern bore its own 2nd round of fruit that same year. The State Banking Commission opened a formal inquiry into lending practices at 2 regional banks, acting on the accumulated complaints from me and 3 other Marbury residents, including the one that had processed Courtney's fraudulent loan in the first place. It would take years to resolve fully, the way these things always did. But the inquiry itself was more than I had ever expected to see in my lifetime. Made public in a modest news item, read at my kitchen table one ordinary Tuesday. Not a verdict, just an opening, just somebody finally willing to look. You started that, Wanda told me, tapping the article. You know that, right? You and your little notebook. I didn't start it, I said. I just finally wrote it down where somebody with the power to look could see it. My mother spent 30 years noticing the same things and never had anywhere to put them. I got lucky enough to have a lawyer who knew where the paper needed to go. That's not luck, Wanda said. That's called finally living somewhere your work gets to matter. I considered that and found I didn't have much to add to it because it was, as far as I could tell, entirely true. I thought some mornings, standing at my kitchen window with my coffee, about the shape of what happened to me that spring. Not with anger anymore, mostly, with something closer to clarity. I'd spent decades being careful in rooms other people assumed belonged more to them than to me. The Maddox's foyer, the bank counter, the county clerk's window, even, in its way, my own daughter's expectations about how much space one aging woman was entitled to occupy. I'd answered all of it, in the end, not with a raised voice, not with one dramatic gesture, but with paperwork, with a deed, with a ledger kept honestly for 61 years, ready the one time it actually needed to be produced. That, I'd come to believe, was the real inheritance my own mother left me, more than any object, more even than the values she'd tried to teach out loud. My mother had spent 30 years being careful in rooms that weren't hers. She had never once, in all that time, stopped believing that one day her daughter would own a room outright, free and clear, with the deed to prove it. Nobody left standing in the doorway to question whose name belonged on it. I had done that. Twice, if I was counting honestly. First with Earl, on Bedford Street. Now alone, on Chester Lane, in a smaller house that fit me exactly. No more, no less than what I actually needed. Precisely the way I'd always preferred my columns to balance. Courtney came for Christmas that year, alone this time. Brandon stayed behind with his own parents. Both families understood this now, without needing to say it out loud. It would be a smaller, quieter holiday than the Maddoxes had once assumed they were entitled to. Courtney brought a store-bought pie and admitted as much before I could even ask. She laughed a little at herself, in a way that felt, for the first time in a long while, genuinely light. I didn't bake it, Courtney said, setting it on the counter. Old habits. I know, I said, but this time you told me. That's the whole difference, baby. That's the entire difference between then and now. We ate at the small table in the bungalow's kitchen, just the two of us, the radio playing carols low in the background. For a while, neither of us mentioned the house, or the loan, or Dale, or any of the 6 weeks that had once threatened to end us both. We simply ate pie and talked about nothing important, the way mothers and daughters are supposed to be allowed to. When Courtney left that evening, she hugged me a beat longer than usual at the door. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Courtney said. "I never gave up on you," I said. "I just stopped letting you decide what I was worth. Those aren't the same thing, and I need you to always remember the difference." Courtney nodded and drove home through a light snow. I stood at my window a while after the taillights disappeared, watching the quiet street, thinking, not for the first time, that some repairs took longer to notice finishing than the breaking ever had. Wanda called that same night, the way she did most nights now, just to talk. "How was the visit?" Wanda asked. "Good," I said. "Really good, actually. She brought a pie she didn't bake and told me so before I could ask." "That's progress," Wanda said. "A year ago, that girl couldn't tell the truth about a store-bought pie without it turning into a whole production." "A year ago, a lot of things were different," I said. "I was different. You were the same all along," Wanda said. "You just finally had a reason to stop hiding it. Some women get that reason at 20. Some get it at 61. Doesn't make it any less real when it finally shows up." "I keep thinking about the $4 error," I said. the one I found in Curtis's shoebox that Sunday morning, right before Courtney walked in with the cake. I fixed it without even thinking twice. Small thing, automatic. And not 20 minutes later, my own daughter told me I'd had my house long enough, and it took me weeks to give that sentence the same kind of correction. "You got there?" Wanda said. "That's the part that matters. Some folks never get there at all." I got there, I agreed. Slower than I'd have liked, but I got there. "Most worthwhile things move slower than we'd like," Wanda said. "That's not a flaw in the thing. That's just the pace of anything built to actually last." I thought about that after we hung up. I stood at my kitchen window a while longer, watching the snow catch the porch light, the way it always did this time of year. I thought about my mother and Earl and the whole long, quiet architecture of a life spent being careful. How it had taken one cruel envelope on one ordinary Sunday to finally show me exactly what I'd been holding the entire time. It was a Sunday morning the following spring, almost exactly a year after the eviction notice arrived beside a cake nobody had baked. I stood in my kitchen on Chester Lane, glasses on their beaded chain, a fresh shoebox of receipts open in front of me, belonging to the young mechanic's new shop. I found an error within the first 2 minutes, a small one, $11, misplaced in a column that should have balanced. I corrected it in the margin, small and neat, the way I corrected everything. I looked up, for just a moment, at Earl's letter framed on the windowsill, morning light finding it exactly the way I'd known it would. I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't need to. I simply picked up my pen again and kept going. There was always another column waiting. I had never once, in 61 years, been afraid of the work it took to make the numbers finally tell the truth. Outside, the street was doing what Bedford Street once did on a Sunday, though this was Chester Lane now, and that was exactly as it should be. A neighbor's dog barked twice at nothing. A car eased past without hurrying. The light came in low and gold across the kitchen floor, patient in the way morning light always was, indifferent to whatever a person had survived to see it. I didn't need the light to tell me anything about myself. I already knew what I'd built, and what it had cost me, and what it had finally, quietly given back. I closed the shoebox, squared its edges against the table's edge, and set it by the door for Monday. Some things simply kept, once a person finally learned how to balance them.